तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्। ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्। ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्।
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. We start today the second module of this current series of courses on yoga, Yes.02, in which the focus will be on nutrition. After this invocation of the divine in the melodious voice of Premshila, let's now learn what Sri Aurobindo and the mother had to say about food. Some of the passages in which they have talked about food will now be read in Tara Didi's voice, who most of you know. But even if you know her already, I enjoy saying a few words about her, so I will. Tara Didi is about 86, and out of these, for 78 years, which means almost all her life, she has been associated either with Sri Aurobindo Ashram Pondicherry or with Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. The first 32 years of these, that is till she was 40, from the age of 8 through the age of 40, she was at Sri Aurobindo Ashram Pondicherry. And the mother was also physically there through most of this period till 1973. So 29 years out of 32 she spent in Pondicherry under the direct guidance of the mother while the mother was physically there. 3 years after the mother left her body, that is in 1973, so 3 years after that in 1976, Tara Didi came back to Delhi, came to Delhi, where her father had already started Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch in 1956. So the Delhi ashram had been there for 20 years, and she came back and started helping her father. And since then she has not turned back. After 1986, when her father left the body, she has been taking care of Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. And even those who didn't know her earlier perhaps now know her, because this year in January in the Republic Day Awards, you might have seen, she was conferred the Padma Shri Award. So, in her powerful voice, you will now hear what Sri Aurobindo and the mother had to say on food.
Sri Aurobindo on food. With regard to the food that man takes, there are two factors that determine or prescribe it. First of all, the real need of the body, that is to say, what the body actually requires for its maintenance, the elements to meet the chemical changes occurring there, something quite material and very definite vis-a the kind of food and the quality. But usually, this real need of the body is obscured and submerged under the demands of another kind of agency, almost altogether foreign to it, vital desire and mental notions. Indeed, the menu of our table, at least 90% of it, is arranged so as to satisfy the demands of the second category. The consideration that should come first comes last, in fact. The body is at present a slave of the mind and the vital. It is hardly given the freedom of choosing its own requirements in the right quantity and quality. That is why the body is seen to suffer everywhere and is normally sick for the greater part of its earthly existence. It is the attachment to food, the greed and eagerness for it, making it an unduly important thing in life, that is contrary to the spirit of yoga. To be aware that something is pleasant to the palate is not wrong. Only one must have no desire or hankering for it, no exultation in getting it, no displeasure or regret at not getting it. One must be calm and equal, not getting upset or dissatisfied when the food is not tasty or not in abundance. Eating the fixed amount that is necessary, not less or more. There should be neither eagerness nor repugnance. To be always thinking about food and troubling the mind is quite the wrong way of getting rid of the food desire. Put the food element in the right place in the life, in a small corner, and don't concentrate on it, but on other things. Neither neglect this turn of the nature, food desire, nor make too much of it. It has to be dealt with, purified, and mastered, but without giving it too much importance. There are two ways of conquering it. One, of detachment, learning to regard food only as a physical necessity and the vital satisfaction of the stomach, and the palate as a thing of little or no importance. The other is to be able to take without insistence or seeking any food given, and to find in it, whether pronounced good or bad by others, the equal rasa, not of the food for its own sake, but of the universal ananda. The idea of giving up food is a wrong inspiration. You can go on with a small quantity of food, but not without food altogether, except for a comparatively short time. Remember what the Gita says. Yoga is not for one who eats in excess, nor for one who abstains from eating altogether. Vital energy is one thing. Of that one can draw a great amount without food, and often it increases with fasting. But physical substance, without which life loses its support, is of a different order. Greed for food has to be overcome, but it has not to be given too much thought. The proper attitude to food is a certain equality. Food is for the maintenance of the body, and one should take enough for that, what the body needs. If one gives less, the body feels the need and hankers. If you give more, then that is indulging the vital. As for particular foods the palate likes, the attitude of the mind and vital should be, if I get, I take. If I don't get, I shall not mind. One should not think too much of food, either to indulge or unduly to repress. That is the best. Do not trouble your mind about food. Take it in the right quantity, neither too much nor too little, without greed or repulsion, as the means given you by the mother for the maintenance of the body, in the right spirit, offering it to the divine in you. Then it need not create tamas. The mother on food. Physically, we depend upon food to live, unfortunately. For with food, we daily and constantly take in a formidable amount of inconscience, of tamas, heaviness, stupidity. One can't do otherwise unless constantly, without a break, we remain completely aware, and as soon as an element is introduced into our body, we immediately work upon it to extract from it only the light and reject all that may darken our consciousness. This is the origin and rational explanation of the religious practice of consecrating one's food to God before taking it. When eating, one aspires that the food may not be taken for the little human ego, but as an offering to the divine consciousness within oneself. In all yogas, all religions, this is encouraged. This is the origin of that practice of contacting the consciousness behind, precisely to diminish as much as possible the absorption of an inconscience which increases daily, constantly, without one's being aware of it. The all-absorbing interest which nearly all human beings, even the most intellectual, have in food, its preparation and its consumption, should be replaced by an almost chemical knowledge of the needs of the body and a very scientific austerity in satisfying them.
Friends, before we begin, may I request that as far as possible, please try to keep your videos on. Always nice to be speaking to faces rather than those black rectangles. So now what we'll do is we'll go on to a short PowerPoint presentation which would give you an idea of the taste of things to come in this course. So we'll get some idea of this course as well as the other courses, how all these courses are related to one another. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. This YES program is a part of the 150th birth anniversary celebrations of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. We'll get introduced to YES.02, but before that, let's get introduced to the YES courses in general, because some of you may be still wondering what all this madness is about. YES.01, YES.02 and more to come. The story behind these courses is that we had for more than 10 years, starting in 2008, an annual 20-week 200-hour standard course on teaching yoga. And then came the COVID crisis, and therefore there was a gap for 2 years. During these 2 years, on one hand we could not conduct this course. On the other hand, we also found, as the world did, that there were possibilities of reaching to a much larger audience online, and therefore we started thinking of how to restructure this program to fit into this new format of being able to bring together on one platform the interested audience online. So the result of this restructuring was that we broke up this course into 4 modules. Yes.01 was conducted from the 12th of January through the 3rd of March this year, and in that the focus in theory was on yoga and spirituality, and on the practical side we tried to have enough for the participants to be able to do confidently a judiciously chosen set of physical practices on their own, which would be adequate to keep themselves fit. But this module, Yes.01, did not really equip them to teach yoga to others. In Yes.02, which we are starting today and which will go on till the 26th of May, the focus in theory will be on nutrition. Nutrition from the point of view of the modern medical science or modern science of nutrition, but it will be blended with traditional knowledge, particularly that enshrined in Ayurveda, because the two are in many ways complementary. On the practical side, Yes.02 will take the participants one step towards actually becoming a yoga teacher. Yes.03, which will start on the 15th of September, so after a considerable gap, and will go on till the 15th of December. The focus in theory will be on health sciences, where we'll integrate the basic as well as the applied health sciences, modern as well as to some extent traditional systems and sciences, to give a sort of an integrated, broad view of health and disease, which is relevant to anybody to keep oneself fit. Because if we understand our body well, we can keep ourselves healthy much more easily than otherwise. And on the practical side, we'll take yet one more step towards the participants actually becoming yoga teachers. Yes.04, which will tentatively start on the 12th of January next year, the focus in theory will be on the common lifestyle diseases, and on the practical side, that will be the last step towards becoming a yoga teacher, and in this, the focus will be on how we can use the understanding of yoga for prevention and management of lifestyle diseases. In Yes.03, in the practical side, the focus will be on specialized groups, particularly children and the elderly, how to teach yoga to these two groups. So that's how by the end of Yes.04, the participants should feel confident in being able to teach yoga to others. The unique features of all these courses, Yes.01 through Yes.04, are that they are completely free. They are being offered completely free as a tribute to Sri Aurobindo, whose 150th birth anniversary we are celebrating this year. These courses follow the free progress model, which means that it is entirely student-centered and driven by the motivation of the students. So each participant learns whatever the person is really interested in, to the extent the person is interested in, and at his or her own pace. So all these class recordings are being made available on YouTube, and therefore one can watch them anytime, and also only the ones in which you are really interested. And having done one course is not necessary for doing the next module. You can always make up for it by going to the class recordings of the previous module if you feel interested. So it's a totally free progress model, that is, the student is free to progress at her own pace, and we have these gaps between modules which are also in fact important from the educational point of view, because they give time to the student to digest what has been learnt. The access is universal. Anybody can access these, and nothing is being held back, because over the 10 years plus that we conducted these courses annually, we improved upon it, and what you are getting is the final version more or less. And also during this period, we ended up producing at least one book on just about every subject that is touched upon in a course on teaching yoga. And through these courses, we are introducing you to those books. And also, while assessing the students in those courses, we built up a large question bank of thought-provoking questions. Those questions and some new ones which are being framed now are also shared with you to the extent it's possible in this format during these classes. What is important to emphasize also is that while we can't claim to be the last word on what is being discussed, at least there is a sincere attempt to present whatever we think is right and true without any dilution or distortion, because we have no commercial interests, no personal interest, no self-interest in conducting these courses, and therefore what you get is without any dilution and distortion, and at the same time we feel no necessity to make any concession to popular demand. For example, if you ask what are those 3 asanas which will cure diabetes, we'll tell you that sorry, you come to the wrong place. So far as we are concerned, neither 3 asanas are enough, nor is cure the right word or the right thing to look for. Now let's get introduced to this course, Yes.02, which we are starting today. Fortunately, eating a healthy diet is rather simple and easy, particularly for Indians, because the traditional Indian diet is more or less what is an ideal diet. That is what modern science is also now converging towards, and it is essentially a diet which is predominantly, if not exclusively, a vegetarian diet, in which the staple foods are a combination of cereals and pulses, and of course we also use a judicious, moderate quantity of a properly chosen fat, spices in moderation, and a good number of helpings of fruits and vegetables, milk in moderation, and that gives us just about every nutrient that one may be looking for in the right proportion, in the right way, and therefore eating a healthy diet is not as difficult as sometimes people think. The emphasis throughout will be on moderation, not on monasticism, and therefore there will be no strict do's and don'ts about what to do and what not to do, what to eat and what not to eat at all. And there will be no emphasis on prolonged fasts. As you heard Sri Aurobindo and the mother also, the emphasis is on moderation, not on total denial, which can be both difficult and risky. And not only that, if one does use the brute force of will to go on prolonged fasts, one can build up egoistic pride, which can be sometimes worse than the ordinary egoism, because the person feels that I've done something remarkable, useful, spiritually uplifting, whereas it has actually done none of these things. Not that fasting in itself is bad. We'll just talk about fast. Yes, occasional fasts for limited amounts of time can have a biological value. They also have an ethical value, and they can be spiritually uplifting. But then for that, the spirit in which the fast is observed is more important than anything else. We'll not talk about any punishing food regimens, because they are in fact not necessary. In the sessions on nutrition, in fact, there's a tendency to have long question answer sessions, which we welcome. But then some of the questions which are not the best ones to ask but are asked very commonly are firstly about single foods. Is olive oil a good food? Is green tea a good food? Or is desi ghee a bad food? And things of that sort. Now here there are a few important things to understand. Firstly, when we say good food, what do we really mean? If we say it's an acceptable food, yes, most of the foods are acceptable, because if it had been so harmful that a small quantity of it taken occasionally can do really serious damage, then by now the food would have been no longer considered a food, it would have been classified as a poison. On the other hand, there is no single food which by itself can meet all our requirements. And in fact, one of the dictums in nutrition is to take a variety of foods, a judiciously chosen variety of foods. And therefore, questions about single foods are generally rather misplaced. And many of these also arise from whatever the current fad is. And some of these fads are driven by commercial interests, which may convey the truth but then convey only part of the truth. For example, suppose there is a study on green tea in which it has been shown that it helps in preventing, say, diabetes or cancer or heart disease. While the study is valid, what it is not telling is that the antioxidants which may be responsible for this protective effect of green tea are found in a very large variety of foods, and green tea is not the only source from where we can get those antioxidants. So while there may be a very large amount of foods, in fact every food is acceptable, there is no food that is indispensable, and there is no single food that will do the type of miracles that may be expected of it. And that is why we should be looking for the proper type of combinations of foods, the variety that we should take, and make informed choices in what we include in that variety. That would be much better than expecting any miracles from any single foods just because they happen to be a part of the current fads. The second thing that would be discouraged would be myths which may be very popular but are unfortunately not true. For example, about proteins, there's a misconception, firstly, that the more the better. We need a certain amount of proteins, but more is not necessarily better. It could be worse than taking the right amount. Of course, what the right amount is, there can be a wide range, and one can have a little more than that without doing any harm, but it's not that just because something is good and necessary, the more of it we take, the better it will be. Secondly, about the sources of protein, again, there are a lot of misconceptions. Particularly, our staple diet is cereals and pulses, and one of the misconceptions is that cereals provide us carbohydrates, whereas pulses provide us proteins. In fact, both cereals and pulses have a large amount of carbohydrate. And therefore, if a person says that I take only pulses and therefore I'm eating only proteins, I do not want to eat carbohydrates, the person is making many mistakes. Firstly, in the pulses that the person is taking, he is taking a large amount of carbohydrate as well. Secondly, by taking protein only from pulses, he is taking unbalanced protein because the cereal and pulse protein are complementary, which means that cereals also have not only carbohydrate, they also have protein. And the third important mistake that he's making is the person is behaving as if carbohydrates are something harmful, and by avoiding those carbohydrates, I'm doing something great. In fact, we get about 70-75% of our energy from carbohydrates in a typical Indian diet, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So these are some of the popular myths that we have, and we'll try to explode them based on scientific facts which will be provided in as simple a way as I possibly can. Then cooking oils. We have had fads about palm oil, about olive oil, rice bran oil, and so on and so forth. But we have come more or less full circle, and now what we find is that a judicious blend of oils is what is important, and if we have to restrict ourselves to only one or two cooking oils and fats, then the traditional wisdom has probably given us just about the best in this area. There are also questions about based on single studies. one research study is done, and for some reasons it finds its way into popular press. And then on the basis of that, people sometimes think that now they can modify their diets in such a way that they'll be eating more healthy because such and such study has shown this. What we have to realize is that single studies are only research studies, and one study cannot give us the last word on what we should do, because for research to translate into popular advice, we need a very large number of studies. And in fact, our current diets are based on studies that have been going on in modern science for the last 300 years and in ancient cultures like ours for more than 5,000 years. And that is how we have arrived at, through trial and error, a certain type of combination of foods which seems to work very well. And genetically, we have also got adapted to the type of diets to which we are accustomed. And therefore, to try and make any major modifications in our diet based on a single research study is not appropriate. And therefore, we should take it with a pinch of salt, and only to the extent that it seems warranted. By and large, single studies cannot translate into popular advice. The three major questions that we'll try to address through this course is what to eat. Now, what to eat can have at least two angles: what we should eat and what we think we should eat. What we should eat is what the absolutely right criteria would be. What we should eat would depend upon foolproof criteria, which are the last word in this area. Unfortunately, that does not exist. So, what to eat then translates into what we should eat. And for that, we have enough working knowledge, and that is what we shall try to see. And then the next question, what we should eat, how far it matches with what we actually eat. And as you heard in that in those lines by Sri Aurobindo, that what we should eat should be based on proper knowledge, food that will meet our requirements for good health properly. But what we actually end up eating is guided more by our vital desires and our mental notions. Vital desires, which means what we like to eat, what we find palatable, and what we think, what our mental notions are, what we think we should eat, which means that we may have erroneous ideas about what we should eat, and therefore what we think we should eat may be far away from not only the last word, it may be quite at deviance with also what the right knowledge currently is. And it is this gap that we'll try to reduce in this course. That is, what you think you should eat may not be in keeping with what we know in this area, and therefore take you a little closer to what the right knowledge in this area is, so that the mental notions change. And then these mental notions can guide what we should eat rather than our palate, that is what we like to eat, what we find more palatable. Doesn't mean that the two cannot go together. Firstly, what we should eat can be quite palatable. Secondly, whether we find a food palatable depends more on our attitude to food rather than on anything inherent in the food itself. So the true sight of taste, as Gandhiji said, the true sight of taste is not in the tongue but in the mind. And this he said, after experiencing in England, he was a vegetarian and he found it was difficult to get those days vegetarian food there. And so he started experimenting with things like boiled spinach. And he found that even that was quite acceptable, and he could eat it, he could relish even that. And that's when he came to the conclusion that the true sight of taste is not the tongue but the mind. Then the next question that we'll see is how much to eat. because the quantity makes a lot of difference. If we eat much less than we need, we are starving ourselves. That is not desirable, because as Sri Aurobindo said, that we can draw a lot of vital energy from the environment, and therefore we feel quite energetic when we are fasting, but eventually it will start showing in the depletion, in the wasting of our material, that is the body. That is, we'll start losing weight, we'll start getting debilitated, we'll start getting emaciated, because that material has to be maintained, and so far the way we are constituted, the only way to keep that material intact and to keep replacing wear and tear is to take food. And therefore we should not be starving ourselves. At the same time, we should not be overeating, not only because we'll put on weight, but even the best of food, if it is eaten in a quantity more than we need, it has a tamasic effect. As the mother said, that we can't help it. We are ingesting tamas or inertia every time we eat. Why? Because all the food that we eat is essentially dead, but it was once living. And therefore, it has entered that state of inertia, that state of tamas, that state of heaviness, which goes with anything which is dead. But then we have no choice there. But what the choice that we have is that we eat it in such a way, consecrating the food to the divine, we eat it in such a way that this food then becomes an appropriate vehicle for once again getting incorporated in the living body and activating our prana in such a way that now these chemicals which are released from this food, they also get charged with that same prana and are able to work intelligently within the body to keep the body healthy. So that comes from mindful eating and the right attitude to eat. So that takes us to the next question: how to eat. Eat consciously, eat mindfully, eat with gratitude. So these are the three types of questions which we shall address, and all are important. While what to eat and how much to eat may be based on scientific facts and may be more rational, how to eat it may be non-rational, but that does not make it untrue. Because whatever is not rational or doesn't fit within the framework of modern science does not by itself become false. Because while I'm in the present era, there's a tendency to look for things which are only scientific. The word scientific has come to be equated with everything that is true, valid, and worthwhile. But in fact, that is not the dictionary meaning of the word scientific. This is only a popular connotation, and it is quite erroneous. Because whatever is not scientific is not necessarily false, and that is because while what science tells us is true, there's no guarantee that it is not just a part of the truth. And the limits of truth are much wider than the limits of science. And therefore, all these three questions are important: what to eat, how much to eat, and how to eat. And these together determine what we get out of food and what we become. Because what we become is not only what we eat, but also what we digest and how we eat. We shall approach the topic of nutrition from the point of view of nutrients. Nutrients are the chemical constituents of food, and this will be done not to make the subject complicated for those who are not very well versed with chemistry. This will be done because that simplifies the subject. There's such a large variety of foods, but the variety of nutrients is relatively limited. We can understand this through an analogy. We have a wide variety of fabrics, like cotton, material from which fabrics are made: cotton, nylon, silk, wool, and so on. Now, starting with these relatively limited types of materials, we can make a large variety of fabrics of different colors. And further, by stitching them in different ways, we can make a still wider variety of garments. In the same way, nature has combined a relatively limited number of nutrients to give us a very wide variety of foods. And by cooking and processing these in different ways, we get a still larger number of recipes. But in the final analysis, when the food is digested and absorbed, it is broken down into its basic nutrients. And that is how we take it into our body and utilize it. And therefore, if we understand it in terms of those nutrients, we will be able to see how it is possible to have a balanced diet using the type of ingredients which are popularly used in India, as well as using the type of ingredients which are used in other parts of the world. Because all these ingredients may be different depending upon the type of foods that are grown locally and available locally and so on, and to which people have got accustomed over generations. So that may give us the type of ingredients which a particular population commonly uses. But these ingredients may be different, but the basic nutrients which constitute these ingredients are essentially the same. And then, of course, the way they are cooked and processed may have some nutritional implications, but not generally as much as we sometimes think. Because ultimately, when this food is broken down into nutrients, it doesn't matter which were the food ingredients that went into it, and also how it was cooked and processed. Those things are relatively less important than the nutrients that are released after digesting what we eat, the recipe that we eat. And therefore, if we understand it in these terms, the task is simplified, because then we will not be obsessed with taking a particular food, even if it is not easily available, if it's classified as an exotic food, if it is very expensive, and so on. If it takes a great deal of trouble to get it, we will not feel in any way deprived if we are not able to get such exotic foods. And from whatever is locally available at a moderate cost, we'll be able to get a judicious combination of ingredients from which we can prepare some simple food. So that's how the task gets simplified if we understand it in terms of nutrients rather than foods. But at the same time, throughout an effort will be made to link this chemistry with the kitchen. So we'll keep translating this knowledge of nutrients in terms of real foods, and sometimes also with the kitchen, how we get recipes out of it. So but nutrients will sort of form the base, just as cotton, nylon, and wool and silk, they would form the basis of all types of dresses that we wear. Fads keep changing, but no matter what the fad diets are always bad diets. Sir Stanley Davidson was an eminent physician, and his textbook of medicine used to be, and I'm sure would still be, one of the best books, if not the most popular books around. The book which you find useful throughout the course is this book, Eating Wisely and Well, which was published by Rupa Books in the year 2012. Thank you. Questions and answers.
We can have questions now in case anybody would you like to ask any question. Meanwhile, there is a question in the chat box. Is fasting recommended to be done every week?
Well, the frequency depends on your convenience, but once a week seems to be a moderate frequency. Total fast or just missing one meal once a week, that's up to you. But once a week seems to be quite a reasonable frequency. Especially, we can then do it on a day on which we are not doing too much work. Once a week is a sort of, to some extent, a holiday, and that is the day on which one should be fasting, not on a day on which one has a lot of work to do.
And not so favorite question of yours, but which fats and oils are the safest for consumption?
Well, I mean, they're all safe, but when we come to fats in greater detail, we'll see that if one has to make a limited choice, then mustard oil and soybean oil. Mustard oil, including its close relatives like canola oil and rapeseed oil, those oils, and soybean oil, along with a moderate quantity of ghee. That seems to be the best combination.
And obesity is a big challenge. What and how can one eat to address this?
Yes, obesity is a multifactorial problem, like all lifestyle diseases, and it's the mother of a very large number of lifestyle diseases. And again, it requires a sort of a concerted approach in terms of what we eat. And we shall see that if we choose our diet judiciously, it is in fact almost impossible to overeat. Because the foods that are easiest to eat, which we eat at the fastest rate and therefore end up overeating, are also the foods that promote gain in weight. Because if we are able to eat a large amount in a short time, they are easy to eat and they are palatable. So it's a double disaster. Say, for example, foods which have high fat or high sugar, these tend to be both more palatable as well as more in their caloric content and also easy to eat. It's much easier to eat, say, cake than to eat an apple, or to drink juice from a dozen apples is much easier than to actually eat a dozen apples. So even juice can be that way, not the best way to have fruit. So we tend to there's a possibility of overeating if we try to go for foods which are easy to eat and are more palatable. That is one. And how will we be able to overcome our desire to have these foods? By developing a certain attitude to food, which means that the attachment to food has to be reduced as to all sensory pleasures. So again, it translates into not only how much to eat, but also what to eat, and then what to eat gets linked to how we eat, with what attitude we eat. And then along with that, physical activity is also important. What type of physical activity, how much of it, with what attitude, all that is again important. Then what time to eat, what should be the frequency of eating, to some extent all these things do matter. So, and that's how, by having a concerted approach, one can certainly reduce this problem of gaining weight. And we shall have an occasion to talk more about it in this module as well as when we come to lifestyle diseases.
Namaste, sir. This is Sonika.
Namaste, Sonika.
Sir, I used to be on fruit diet on Sundays for a very long time. Falahar, keval falahar, koi ann nahi. So I used to feel starved many a times. I won't say it was very comfortable. Then for some problems that I had, I visited a vet and he told me that there was a lot of acid formation happening in my body and it wasn't okay for me to stay hungry for long periods of time. He wasn't aware that I was doing this fruit diet thing. So I just wanted to ask if, the conclusion, so can we conclude that even, things which are universally recommended like fasting, they are also individual specific. So what I understood from this message was that probably skipping one meal twice a week or avoiding eating after 7 p.m. at night would be the thing for me. Maybe fasting works well for others.
Firstly, an exclusively fruit diet or diet made up of uncooked food can exhaust you. You will feel deprived of food and hungry because that provides very few calories. Secondly, whether there are individual differences, yes, they are there, and Ayurveda is sort of the repository of that type of knowledge. And in general, those who have a predominance of pitta in their prakriti are people who should not be perhaps fasting. So there are certain prakritis in which it is desirable not to fast.
I see. Thank you so much, sir. Actually, this pitta is dominant in my prakriti, so I didn't know that. Thank you so much.
And the next question is, lot is being spoken about detox food and drinks. Will this also be discussed?
Well, detox food is again sort of a current jargon, and something that I'm not very happy with. I'll tell you why. Because when we say detox, it gives the impression that there are some toxins in the body which we are trying to get rid of. In general, if you really ask the person which are the toxins that we are getting rid of, they can't really pinpoint which toxins we are trying to get rid of. Yes, I mean, there are waste materials produced in the body, and there are mechanisms for getting rid of them, and maybe some periodic cleansing may be required. But at the same time, whether certain foods will be able to achieve that detoxification effect, firstly, I mean, we have to be a little more sort of clear about that. And some people, yes, in certain seasons, according to Ayurvedic knowledge, do benefit from certain type of cleansing procedures, but then they also have to be done under proper supervision, because they can be quite complex and risky if one tries to attempt them entirely on one's own. So it's better once again to stick to moderation unless one feels the necessity, or one has that type of guidance available where one can undergo some extensive cleansing procedure in the right season to the right extent, and if that particular person really needs it.
In the same line about detox, somebody is asking, in a way, medicines are to some extent considered as toxins. So is detox recommended to address this, and how?
Well, medicine is something really very broad again, and all medicines may not be necessarily toxins, because sometimes with medicines, what I'm particularly saying is we mix up things like, say, insulin and thyroxine. Now, these are not drugs which are, I mean, they are chemicals, but they are not really drugs in the usual sense of the word. They are replacement for something which the body should be normally producing, but due to some reasons is not producing in adequate amounts. And unless we are able to reverse the damage in the body which has led to this deficiency, at least as a stopgap arrangement, what is necessary is to replace what the body is not itself able to manufacture. So this is not to be looked upon as a medicine which is necessarily toxic. Another thing is that for medicines which may not be required in the body, there are adequate mechanisms in the liver to detoxify them and get them out of the body, generally through urine. And therefore, we have quite a bit of sort of wisdom inherent in the body, and to the extent we depend upon that, that would be better than resorting to any other more aggressive measures, unless it becomes necessary and is advised by an expert.
Is there any method you would like to recommend to consume fruits?
As far as possible, firstly, I mean, they should be washed. But then, to the extent, I mean, it's reasonable, because these days, you know, we have got sometimes very concerned about the chemicals which the foods might have been sprayed, etc. But then, so moderation, washing in moderation is okay. But then some people are soaking them for hours together before consuming. That may be a little bit of a fad, because what we can do through washing is to remove what may be on the surface. But if a fertilizer was added to the soil and it has got into the very fabric of the plant, even washing will not help. So to some extent, with modern methods of agriculture, some of the unwanted chemicals might actually get into the body. And once again, if the choice is between therefore not eating any of those foods, for that matter eating no food at all, and eating the type of foods that are available. Naturally, if we don't eat, because everything is likely to be contaminated in one way or other with the fertilizers and what has been sprayed upon them and so on, then if we stop eating, we can't live. On the other hand, in moderation, if we are a little cautious about how we eat, that may be useful. And therefore fruits, washing, and then as far as possible the whole fruit, not the juice. And wherever it's acceptable to have also the skin, eat with the skin intact if one can digest it. And seasonal fruits rather than any exotic fruits. Locally produced seasonal fruits, because Mother Nature provides us the type of fruits that are most appropriate for that season.
There's somebody asking, I am finding difficulty in digesting milk. I am 48 years old. So any suggestions?
If a person is finding it difficult to digest milk, generally you will be able to digest curd. So one can use that as a substitute. That is probably the simplest solution. The other solution, of course, would be to take a smaller quantity of milk. The amount that is quite adequate to give us the amount of calcium and B12 for which we generally consume milk and feel it's necessary is about 1 glass of milk or its equivalent as a milk product like curd. So if one is not able to digest even that much, then it may be better to take curd. If you are accustomed to taking a larger quantity of milk, maybe you can divide it into 2 small portions. That can be another solution.
There's one suggestion in the chat box. Please introduce and discuss the term keto diets and the harm they cause.
Keto diets are high-fat diets, and again they are fat diets. They should be. There's really no necessity for going on that type of a diet.
There are some good food combinations and some bad food combinations. Will this be covered in this course?
Yes, we will do that.
And what is the basic idea when we say we are fasting, and what's the concept behind liquid diet? What are its benefits on body?
The first question, there's 2 questions, no?
Yes.
And the first question is about fasting.
Yes, what is the basic idea when we say we are fasting?
Yes, the basic idea is that we are not providing the food with the frequency with which we normally are accustomed to take. And this can be of some value because in the modern world, we've got accustomed to taking something every 4 hours or so. And this type of a predictable supply of food coming round the clock is a relatively recent phenomenon in the living world. Even human beings once upon a time did not get food so regularly. Animals even now don't. So our body is geared for a little more erratic supply rather than this type of a predictable supply. And the way we can manage on that erratic supply is because the body has mechanisms to maintain the blood sugar levels even if we do not consume any food for say 12 hours, the blood sugar levels will be still maintained. Now, the general principle in the body is that if we use any mechanism that is available to us, it gets better. If we never use it, it gets weaker. So by providing a predictable supply of food in such a way that we never have to use those mechanisms which are there for maintaining blood sugar in spite of not eating for a fairly long time, those mechanisms, if they are not used, they'll get weaker. So we are weakening our capacity of our body in some ways by never observing a fast. So that is probably the most rational way of looking at why fasting might help. We are strengthening those mechanisms in the body which help us maintain normal blood sugar levels in spite of not eating for a certain period of time. So we are strengthening those mechanisms. That's the biological explanations. Of course, apart from that, there can be other reasons, ethical, moral, and so on. We will not go into that. But this one reason certainly is a strictly sort of scientific reason why fasting could be helpful. The second question is about liquid diet. Again, that is unless one has difficulty in taking something solid, it would not be really desirable to have a liquid diet, because and the volume will be such that it will be difficult to consume the required amount of energy. This diet, which is all liquid, will end up becoming what one may call a very low caloric density diet, which means a very large volume will be able, only a very large volume will be able to provide the amount of energy we need. Secondly, it could also dilute the digestive juices once it gets to the gastrointestinal tract, and therefore in fact, neither modern scientific knowledge nor Ayurvedic knowledge recommends a liquid diet. What is in fact emphasized to some extent in traditional wisdom is the amount of water that we should take with a meal and when we should take it. The amount generally should be around not more than 1 glass, and 1 glass may be okay because again, to avoid overeating, a dictum in traditional wisdom is that divide your stomach into 4 parts, fill 1 part with water, 2 parts with food, and leave 1 part empty. Now, it can't be as mathematical as that, but what the spirit behind this is that one should not go on eating till one can't eat anymore. Even when you have some capacity left to eat, do just stop eating, and the capacity is there, but psychologically you will feel full much before that, much before you reach the limits of your capacity to eat. So one should stop when one feels psychologically full. Second thing is that some amount of water will also fill the tummy, which will contribute to this feeling of fullness, so 1 glass is okay. When to take it? There are all types of recommendations before the meal, during the meal, and after the meal, and all 3 have a rationale. If one takes it before the meal, some degree of fullness will be achieved right at the beginning, and therefore one is less likely to overeat. If one takes during the meal, then there's a tendency to take a few sips of water when you move from one type of food to another. That way you enjoy the taste of the next food better. So that's more of a sort of a indulgence in sensory pleasures, taking during the meal. And at the end of the meal, again there's a rationale, because food staying in the between the teeth, sticking between the teeth, starts getting fermented, and that can lead to eventually to cavities in the teeth, and therefore one should rinse one's mouth immediately after eating food. If that is not always very practical, if one takes water at the end of the meal, to some extent that will work the same as rinsing the mouth. So one gets at least a bit of a mouthwash at the end of the meal. So all 3 have a rationale. But the total quantity of water taken during the meal should be just about 1 glass.
Okay, next question. What is the reason for food allergies, and how can one reverse it naturally?
The reason for food allergies is that our intestines are constructed in such a way that they don't let any large molecules pass through, and protein molecules are in general large. But because of some reasons, if the intestine lets some large protein molecules get through, the body could respond through an allergic response. Well, that sort of is the basic mechanism, but one thing which is happening is that gradually, it seems, and the contrast is still quite marked between India and the Western countries. In the Western countries, the food allergies are far more common, and in India they are getting a little more common because are moving in the same direction in terms of our lifestyles. There could be several reasons why they have become so much more common in the West now, and one of the hypotheses is that this is because they have sanitized their environments beyond what was absolutely necessary. So the immune system does not get enough time to work, because you need some exposure to dirty things, so to say, to be able to respond through an immune response. Now, if one sanitizes the environment so much that the immune system does not get that opportunity to work, it starts working for wrong reasons. And one of the wrong reasons could be this. Another reason could be that the diets which are very low in fiber, which again is more characteristic of the Western diets, the intestinal wall is generally thinner. And this thin intestinal wall probably also could let these proteins pass more easily. So these are so it's linked to the lifestyle, and therefore a bit of calculated neglect of sanitation. And if we are not fussy about it, that will automatically happen. Children, tend to immunize themselves by putting all sorts of things in the mouth. We keep discouraging them, which also in a way is okay, but same time that is their inherent mechanism of acquiring immunity early in childhood. And to some extent we keep needing these boosters perhaps throughout. Recently I had a visitor from the US, and I told him that I'm not offering you water because I don't have mineral water. Your tummy might be accustomed to taking extremely clean water all the time. He said, no, I keep coming to India every year and I never bother about what water I am drinking, so I never get gastroenteritis, so I get a yearly booster dose of the Indian environment. That's what keeps me from getting any gastroenteritis. So there is a certain sort of truth in not being too fussy about our sanitation, and that will also provide, not only help us from gastroenteritis, prevent gastroenteritis, it could also help us prevent perhaps food allergies.
There are two questions related to fruits. One, should fruits be eaten before meals or after meals? And are there any fruits to be avoided, like grapes, which are heavily pesticide strained?
When it comes to fruits in relation to the meal, either not at all with the food, they should be independent of the meal, or if at all they have to be taken as a part of the meal, probably taking them before is better, because this type of uncooked food which has fewer calories will still fill the tummy, and therefore we are less likely to overeat if the fruit has been taken. That is one of the ends it can serve if taken at the beginning of the meal. Secondly, particularly about grapes, well, I mean, if you have a knowledge about its having been sprayed and therefore you want to avoid it, you may, but otherwise one can wash and eat.
And one query, eventually during the course, will you be sharing a list or timetable kind of thing about the basic healthy food, fruits, veggies we can have on a daily basis to begin with for a healthy lifestyle?
Well, in general, we'll not go through lists of foods to be taken, but the broad categories would be given, so that within those categories, whatever you are accustomed to, whatever is locally available, you can choose those. We should have a variety, but it's not necessary to have all the variety possible. Variety has to be, again, moderate and judiciously chosen. For example, suppose one says that, well, one should have some cereal, but it's not necessary to have half a dozen cereals at every meal. That increase in the variety will not really necessarily make the diet more healthy. And that reminds me also of this multigrain has become very popular these days. The multigrain should also be judicious combinations of those grains are important, because all the grains are not equally good throughout the year. For example, barley is better for summers, whereas jowar and bajra are better for winters. So not every grain in every season.
Is it okay to take some supplements like calcium supplements, or they should be completely avoided?
Supplements are a tricky question. In moderation, generally they don't do any harm, and therefore moderate amounts act like a sort of an insurance policy. That is, just in case the diet is not providing enough, if I take the supplement, I'm a little more sure. So therefore they are generally acceptable. But at the same time, mega doses are in strict no, which means doses which are much more than is really required should be avoided, because they could even be harmful, because excess of anything can be bad.
And is fixing time for food, is it a good habit?
Yes, it's good to have a routine. But again, not be obsessed with it. A certain routine is always useful, and again, I mean, that takes us also to the timing and frequency. Strictly speaking, in terms of traditional knowledge, 2 meals a day should be enough. And out of these, the heaviest meal should be somewhere between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. because that is the time when our digestive fire is at its peak. But then more than 2 is also acceptable. 3 to 4 meals is acceptable, provided the heaviest meal still remains during this range 10 to 2, and the dinner is the lightest meal and early, which means that an early dinner and a light dinner, that would be the best sort of a routine to establish. But then again, not obsessed with it. If sometimes it has to be taken an hour earlier or an hour later, nothing terribly will go wrong. The body can adjust to that.
Does the intake of water depends on one's age, or is the standard 8 to 10 glasses good for all?
It doesn't really, strictly speaking, depend too much on age. It depends more on how much one is losing. Because water should replace what is lost. In summers, particularly if one is exposed to the heat, the losses will be more, and therefore we need more. And to guide us about how much we need, there are two basic guides. One is the thirst, and the other is the color of the urine. Both are important because if we depend only on thirst, we are likely to take the minimum that is necessary, which may not be the best thing to do. A little more than that is better. And to that, the color of the urine may provide some clues, because as far as possible, the urine should not get too yellow. That is because a very concentrated, body is trying to adjust to the amount of water available. So if the water available is less, the kidneys concentrate it more, it gets yellow. So we are in water balance, but at the expense of the kidneys working over time to concentrate the urine. The kidneys may not get tired, but with that concentrated urine, we run the risk of forming urinary stones as well as getting a urinary tract infection. Because germs also grow more easily on concentrated urine, and crystals, which may eventually grow into stones, are also more likely to form with concentrated urine. I can see Dr. Bhaumik there. I don't know, he's a nephrologist, so maybe he may want to say something on this. Yeah. Dr. Bhaumik, you want to say something?
Yes. Thank you so much. I think it's a pleasure being in this course, and I've always enjoyed it, ESO1 as well as ESO2. And I think nutrition is a very important component. And I always tell everyone that don't worry so much about how many glasses of water you're drinking. It's very important that you said the color should be always very light. And if you want to really measure, then it's good to have output of at least 1.5 to 2 liters. And as you rightly said, in summer you have to drink more, and in winter maybe you have to drink less. So quantity of urine should ideally be around 1.5 to 2 liters, and it should be light. And of course, thirst is the ultimate thing. You should, of course, take enough water so that you don't feel thirsty, but that is the bare minimum. But yes, from the kidney point of view, is very important, because otherwise, not only that, if you pass too much concentrated urine all the time, it's harmful in other ways as well, apart from passing stones. The high concentrated capacity itself, has been found in the long run is not very good. It can cause interstitial fibrosis also. So I think that's very important.
Thank you.
Along these lines, there are two more questions on water. Is it bad to have cold water, and why is it recommended not to drink water with meal or right after meal?
Well, I did sort of talk about before the meal, during the meal, and after the meal. And for all three, there's a rationale. In the same way, for not doing it, not drinking water at that time, also there can be a rationale, particularly for during the meal, because that's mere sensory intelligence. And one of the sort of popular sayings is that the one who drinks before the meal is a yogi, and the one during the meal is a bhogi, and after the meal is a rogi. May not be strictly so, but to some extent does reflect us. Perhaps at least the yogi and the bhogi part is quite correct. But at the same time, I mean, that sensory indulgence is something which also has to be overcome through a process of an inner change rather than through suppression of a desire which is intense and strong. And what was the other question?
Cold water.
Cold water, yes, because particularly if it is taken in association with a meal, cold water will slow down the digestive process. All biological reactions, work best at the body temperature. So by bringing that temperature down, will slow down the digestion.
And does Sattvic food recommend plant-based milk?
In general, I mean, Sattvic foods, one of the things to point out is that originally, if you say the oldest literature on this, like the Gita, it doesn't talk in terms of Sattvic foods and Rajasic foods. It talks in terms of Sattvic and Rajasic and Tamasic people, not foods. Which means people with a certain type of psychological constitution, like being Tamasic, Rajasic or Sattvic, have a liking for a particular type of food, and the type of foods they like may be called correspondingly Tamasic, Rajasic and Sattvic. Now, if Sattva is the principle of knowledge and harmony, and it also generally goes with a higher ethical standard. And one of the things that is normally associated with a higher ethical standard is trying to sort of minimize pain and suffering resulting from what one eats. And that's how it takes us to the plant-based diet. A person with a sattvic tendency is more likely to also turn vegetarian. Even if he's not vegetarian at birth, he's likely to turn vegetarian through choice. That is a greater likelihood. And apart from that, of course, this sattvic person also, as the Gita says, is likely to have a liking for foods which are soft, succulent, sweet, and healthy, which will nourish the body well.
That will be all for the question answers. In regards to the scheduling of the Yes 0.2 classes, every Monday and Wednesday we will have the practical classes, and Tuesday, Thursday we will have theory classes in which Dr. Bijlani will be speaking, plus we'll be having few guest speakers. And people who are new to the Yes community, we also have Yes talks on every Friday. So tomorrow we have a Yes talk by Professor Anurag Agarwal on insights into COVID-19. So you can use the same Zoom link to join the Friday talks as well. And our next class will be on Monday, same time 8:30. So thank you everyone for joining. And these class recordings will also be uploaded on the YouTube channel, so for your later access. So you can keep a tab on the YouTube channel as well. And today we end with the music, and hope to see you all on Monday and as well as for tomorrow's Friday talk. Thank you everyone.
कुसुम कली सा मेरा सुभग शिशु हूँ मैं तेरा, सरल सुभग शिशु हूँ मैं तेरा, वंदित कर माँ, वंदित कर। अपने करुणामय रंग में उरे मुखरित कर माँ, मुखरित कर। अपने करुणामय रंग में उरे मुखरित कर माँ, मुखरित कर। अपने पग नख अपने पद नख के सौरभ से, अपने पद नख के सौरभ से सुरभित कर माँ, सुरभित कर। कली सा मेरा मानस विकसित कर माँ, विकसित कर। सरल सुभग शिशु मैं तेरा, सरल सुभग शिशु हूँ मैं तेरा, वंदित कर